The wind carried the stink of broken pine and wet cattle hides. It blew hard across the ridgeline, down through the charred skeletons of trees, whistling low like something grieving. Eli Cotter stood with his back to the storm's dying edge, boots sunk ankle-deep in mud, his coat stiff with soot and cold. The barn was gone, splintered, carried off like driftwood in that roaring wall of sky. His fingers still trembled from digging through the wreckage with nothing but a shovel and prayer, hoping for a miracle that hadn't come. The ranch, what was left of it, leaned quiet behind him, just the stone chimney of the main house still standing like a grave marker. The animals that hadn't run off were lying stiff in the fields, and the roof of the bunkhouse flapped like loose skin. Eli's lungs felt full of ash. He could still hear the roar in his ears. The storm had come fast, crawling down from the mountains like it had been hunting something. By the time the sky split open, there was no time to run. The rain came sideways, then the hail, then wind that ripped fences from the ground like they were matchsticks. Now it was over, and the silence that followed was worse. He turned slow and stiff and headed toward the far tree line. He'd seen movement there, might have been a deer, might been his mind playing tricks. But his boots moved before he questioned it. Nothing else to do. No one coming. No one ever came. The pine needles were slick underfoot, the air thick with wet moss and broken branches. As he reached the bend in the hill, the ground dipped into a hollow where runoff from the storm still pooled. That's when he saw them. 6 of them. Children. Or maybe ghosts. They huddled beneath the sagging remains of a wagon covered in patchwork blankets soaked through. The wheels were sunk deep into the mud, and one of the horses lay crumpled nearby, half buried in silt. Eli stopped short, blinking against the sting in his eyes. For a moment all he could hear was the drip of water off the trees. The oldest couldn't have been more than 14. A girl, barefoot, her dress torn at the hem. She was standing between him and the others, jaw-tight, shoulders drawn up like a stray dog ready to bite. The others were crouched behind her thin arms, hollow cheeks, eyes too big for their faces. He took one step. She didn't move. "You alone?" he asked. She nodded once. Quick. But her body stayed tense. He glanced back at the wagon. No adults. No signs of a trail. Just the wreck and the wrecked. Thunder still murmured far off like a closing door. "You hurt." She shook her head, then hesitated. "My brother's got a fever." Eli swallowed. His chest ached like something inside it had cracked. He looked up at the sky. The clouds had turned a dull copper soft now, the way they sometimes look before snow. He should have turned around. Instead, he shrugged off his coat and stepped forward slow, showing his empty hands. "I got a stove," he said. "Still works." No one spoke. The wind picked up a thread of the girl's hair and lifted it, then let it fall. "You don't come," he said, voice low, "you freeze out here." "That's truth." One of the smaller kids coughed, a wet, rattling sound that told him all he needed to know. The girl didn't move for a long time. Then finally she looked back at the others, said nothing, just nodded once. That night Ellie carried the sick boy in his arms while the girl led the others through the dark, one hand clutching the blanket closed at her throat. The wind died down. The world felt impossibly quiet, as if waiting. The fire in the main room still worked just barely. He kept it low at first so the smoke wouldn't choke them. Found what dry flour and oats he had left, boiled it into something that passed for food. They didn't speak much. He didn't ask questions. But when the girl finally ate, her hands trembling around the tin cup, he saw her eyes glisten. Not from fear, not from grief, but from something harder. Hope. Morning came slow. The light crawled in gray through the busted windows, tracing thin silver lines across the warped floorboard. The storm had left the world washed out and still. Not quiet in a peaceful way, but like something had been emptied and hadn't yet come back. Eli was already up sitting at the table with a mug of boiled chicory, watching the fire eat low through what was left of the dry wood. He hadn't slept. Not really. Just dozed in the chair with his boots on, half listening for sounds, coughs, cries, footsteps that didn't belong. The kids were tucked into corners of the room on old quilts and feed sacks, their small bodies curled like question marks. The sick boy had broken into a sweat during the night, which Ellie took as a good sign. Fever breaking. Maybe. The girl, the one who hadn't given her name, was the last to stir. She rose like someone who'd learned to sleep without resting. Her eyes were alert before her body moved, and when she sat up, her gaze found him across the room. Not startled. Not grateful. Just watching. He nodded toward the basin by the stove. Water's clean. I boiled it. She got up and crossed the room, careful not to step on the others. Her feet were cracked and dirty, soles worn raw. She didn't flinch. "What happened?" he asked, not looking at her. She didn't answer for a moment. Then wagon busted a wheel in the gully. My uncle tried to fix it. Then the storm came. He ran for town, said he'd bring help. Eli waited. She was silent. "That was 4 days ago." He nodded. "No one's come looking." She shook her head. "You got people." She didn't answer. He watched the fire snap. There was a nail driven into the mantel where a cross used to hang. His mother's doing. He'd pulled it down years back. Still hadn't patched the hole. "I'm not looking to take on nobody's business," he said. "Not my place. But you can't stay in a busted wagon. That's plain." The girl turned, voice quiet but steady. "We can work." Eli almost laughed. Not out of mockery, but the kind of dry breath that comes when something hurts and you don't know what else to do. They were kids. Bones and shadows. He rubbed his thumb across the rim of his cup. "This ain't a place meant for anyone right now. Just barely holds me." She met his eyes. "Then we'll make it fit." There was no plea in her voice. Just fact. That was how it started. Over the next days, the house filled with the sound of feet. Small feet padding across old floors. Coughs and spoons and whispers in the dark. Eli fixed what he could, patched the roof with tar and canvas, set traps for rabbits, split the last of the pine logs from the downed grove. He didn't talk much. Neither did they. But work has a way of making strangers less strange. The girl, he learned her name was Ruth, took to cleaning. She scrubbed the soot from the hearth, aired out the moth-bitten bedding, swept until her shoulders ached. The younger ones followed her lead like ducklings. The sick boy Levi recovered enough to sit upright, then to smile, gap-toothed and shy. One afternoon, while Eli was mending a broken fence rail, Ruth came to the edge of the yard, her hands folded in front of her skirt. "You always live alone?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Seems like it." "Why?" Eli paused, the hammer hanging loose in his grip. The wind blew soft across the prairie grass, whispering like it had secrets it never told. "Got tired of losing what I tried to keep." She didn't press. Just stood there a moment longer, then turned back toward the house. That night he found a loaf of hard bread left beside his chair, still warm. No one said a word about it. Subscribe and keep your eyes on the far ridge. The thaw came late that year. Snow clung to the edges of the fence posts like lichen, and the ground stayed hard long after the sun had begun its climb back over the hills. But inside the house something had shifted. Not loud. Not sudden. Just the slow warming of breath and routine. Eli built a second bed frame out of salvaged planks and strung it with rope tight enough to hold straw. The children took turns sleeping in it 2 by 2. Ruth insisted she stay on the floor. Said she liked to be near the stove where she could hear if Levy's cough came back in the night. They never called him Mr. Cotter, only Sir, though even that softened to Mr. after a while, drawn out with a tired kind of affection. He didn't correct them. In the mornings Ruth helped boil coffee and fry cornmeal cakes in a cracked skillet. Eli would ride out to check the traps or sometimes just walk. The cattle were gone, most of them dead or scattered, and the land too soaked for planting until spring. But he kept moving. He always had. One day Ruth joined him. She didn't ask, just pulled on her shawl and followed as he headed up the ridge. The wind was sharp enough to bite, but she kept pace. They said nothing for a long time. At the top they looked out across the valley. The trees still bare. Smoke from the chimney curled slow into the sky. She was the first to speak. "You ever have kids?" Eli didn't answer right away. His jaw tensed. He pressed his boot into the frostbitten grass. "I did," he said finally. The words came out like rust. "One boy, Thomas, died with his mother. Long time back." Ruth didn't look at him, just nodded, eyes fixed on the land below. "What happened?" "Birth went wrong." He swallowed. No doctor would come out this far. Too late when they did. Silence settled like snow. "I was 23, he added. "Built that house with my own hands, start to finish. Thought it'd be enough." She didn't say she was sorry. Didn't reach out. Instead, she asked, "Why'd you stay?" Eli let out a slow breath. "Didn't feel like I belonged anywhere else." The wind picked up, blowing through the trees behind them. He turned to look at her. Ruth's cheeks were red with cold hair tucked into her collar, eyes clear and steady. "You're too young to be carrying the world," he said. Her voice didn't shake. Someone had to. When they walked back, she didn't trail behind like before. She walked beside him. Over the next weeks, Ruth took over more. She helped repair the chicken coop, taught the littlest girl, Molly, her letters using charcoal and feed sacks. She even tried riding one of the half-wild mares Eli hadn't sold off, and though she fell hard the first time, she got back up with dirt on her teeth and fire in her eyes. Eli started carving again. He hadn't picked up his knife in years, but one quiet night, after the children had gone to sleep, he pulled the cedar box down from the high shelf. Inside were half-finished toy shapes, smoothed by time, horses, birds, a tiny rocking chair never completed. He carved a fox that week. Small, lean, clever-looking. Left it on the windowsill where Levi liked to sit. The next morning it was gone. In its place, a daisy. Wilted but offered. He didn't say a word about it, but something in his chest loosened. The spring rains came hard and sudden, turning the dirt path from the house to the barn into a ribbon of thick, sucking mud. Days passed in a gray hush, the air heavy with damp and the house filled with the muffled rhythm of weather drips from the eaves, the creak of soaked wood, the occasional snap of a log giving way in the fire. They lived close then, all of them. Closer than Eli had known how to be in years. The children began to laugh more, their voices lifting like birds startled into flight. Ruth read aloud from a water-damaged Bible she'd salvaged from the wagon, not for scripture but for the sound of words. Evenings they played quiet games by firelight. Levi's cough never fully left, but it faded into something manageable. Eli didn't say much, but he listened, watched. One night he found Ruth standing by the back door, arms folded, staring into the dark. "Something out there?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, just thinking." "'Bout what?" She hesitated. "How long you think we can stay like this?" He stepped closer, close enough to see the way her brows tightened. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But it's holding for now." I keep waiting for it to fall apart. Why? Because it always does. The wind outside pressed against the boards. Somewhere far off a coyote called. He looked at her, really looked. She wasn't a child, not anymore. But she wasn't grown either. She was that fragile thing in between, shaped too early by loss and not yet worn smooth by time. He thought of the way she had led those children through a storm, fed them, stood in front of strangers without blinking. You don't have to carry everything alone, he said. She met his eyes. And you do. He smiled, but it didn't reach far. Guess we're both stubborn. That night he left the lamp burning a little longer than usual, just in case she woke up afraid and needed light to find her way. But it wasn't fear that came next. It was noise, hooves, voices, wagon wheels crunching over wet gravel. The knock on the door came at first light. Eli opened it to find a man in a soaked coat and fine boots standing beside two deputies and a wagon hitched with a pair of bay horses. Looking for Ruth and her kin, the man said, voice clipped. They belong to me. Ruth stood behind Ellie, silent. The others peered around her, eyes wide. Who are you? Eli asked. Name's Harmon Tate. Her uncle. Ruth didn't move. She stared at the man like she didn't know him. She says you left them, Ellie said. Storm hit, you ran. Tate's jaw twitched. I went for help. Took you weeks. I got delayed. Ruth stepped forward. Her voice was quiet but clear. We don't want to go. Tate looked past Eli, narrowed his eyes. That's so. They're safe here, Eli said. They've been fed, cared for. I'm family, Tate snapped. They ain't yours to keep. Eli held still, every inch of him tightening. He saw the way Ruth flinched when Tate raised his voice, saw how the children shrank back. He stepped onto the porch. You want to take them, he said. You can't just say you're blood. You gotta prove you're better than what they've had. The deputies watched, uncertain. Tate's hand hovered near his coat pocket. Eli's voice dropped. Go on then. Try me. Tate didn't move. Rain started falling again, light and cold. Finally, one of the deputies stepped forward. If the girl don't want to go, we can't force her. Not without cause. Tate stared long and hard at Ruth, then at Eli. Something cold flickered in his eyes. This ain't over. He turned and climbed into the wagon. The deputies followed. The wheels rolled away down the hill and out of sight. Eli stood in the doorway long after they were gone, rain soaking the brim of his hat. Ruth stayed beside him, silent. Finally she spoke. Thank you. He didn't answer, just closed the door behind them, slow and sure. And for the first time since the storm, the house felt like home. The land bloomed slow that year, as if testing the world before it trusted it again. Shoots of wild grass pushed up through the frost-bitten soil. The apple trees behind the barn, left untouched for seasons, showed blossoms like pale flags of surrender. Life, stubborn as ever, returned. Eli plowed the field himself. The ox was gone, so he rigged an old mule to the rusted blade, body aching by the third furrow. Ruth walked alongside, sleeves rolled up, hands blistered from lifting stone and clearing root. She never asked to rest. She just kept going, the same quiet fire in her that had gotten them through the cold. The children changed too. Levy grew taller, stronger. He spent hours carving little animals from scrap wood and placing them carefully around the porch rail. Molly laughed louder now, chasing chickens with a makeshift lasso made of twine. The oldest boy, Samuel, had taken to tending the garden, lining the rows with sticks and string like he'd seen Eli do. They became a shape together. Not perfect, not planned, but real. One evening after supper, Eli found Ruth sitting on the porch steps with her boots off, rubbing her swollen ankles. She looked up at him without flinching, like she belonged there, and maybe she did. Your hands are shaking, he said. She glanced down, frowning. Guess I'm tired. You've been pushing too hard. She shrugged. That's how things get done. He sat beside her. The sun was setting in wide strokes across the prairie, and the cicadas had begun to hum. You don't always have to carry the heavy end, he said. She looked at him, something uncertain flickering in her eyes. You mean now, she said. Or later? Both. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't know much, Ruth. I'm not a preacher. Not a man with fine words. But I know what it means to keep waking up to something you thought you lost. She didn't speak. He kept going. You and those kids, you walked out of that storm and made this place more than it's been in years. You didn't ask for it, but you did it anyway. She bit her lip hard. Her eyes burned, but she didn't let the tears fall. I don't know what kind of life you think you can have after a start like that, he said. But I'll tell you this, whatever it is, you don't have to walk into it alone. The words hung there. Heavy. True. Then Ruth whispered, almost too soft to hear, I don't know how to be anything else. He nodded. Neither did I. Until you showed up. The next morning, she didn't ask for permission. She walked into the field with a bundle under her arm, a worn dress soft with age, and a piece of lace she'd been keeping for a Sunday that never came. She handed them to Eli without a word and began mending the side of the house where the rain had rotted the boards. That evening, after the kids were asleep, they shared coffee on the porch. Eli reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out, a carved ring, rough and simple, cedar and cottonwood twined together. He placed it in her hand. Not fancy, he said, but made it with care. She turned it over, studying the shape, her thumb resting on the seam where the two woods met. I ain't asking for anything quick, he added. Just want you to know this life, it's here. If you want it. Her eyes met his. There was no fear left in them, only quiet. I do, she said. The next day they planted seeds together. Rows and rows of promise, each one covered with dirt and hope. And when the rain came again, it fell soft, not like a threat, but like a blessing. Summer brought heat thick enough to slow the world down. Dust rose from the ground and waves clung to sweat. Slick skin settled into the corners of the house, no matter how often Ruth swept. The children grew brown and strong under the sun, bare feet, calloused arms, streaked with mud and ash from cooking fires and blackberry brambles. The rhythm of life steadied. Eli fixed the roof for good, laid new shingles by hand, one slow nail at a time. Ruth canned wild plums in mason jars so old their glass had turned green, and the children gathered eggs, milked the ornery goat, and strung laundry across the yard like flags in a windless country. One evening Samuel came running back from the creek with wide eyes and a gash on his knee, talking fast about riders. Two of them. Strangers. Headed toward the ranch. Eli stepped off the porch before the dust had settled. Rifle in hand, not raised but ready. The men rode up slow, not like they were in a hurry, but like they were looking to be seen. Both wore hats low and coats too clean for this country. One was thin and sharp-eyed. The other was younger, with a mustache he hadn't grown into. You caught her? The older one asked. Eli nodded once. We're with the county office, the man said, swinging down from his saddle. Got word a group of orphans might be out here. Heard some tale about a storm and a busted wagon. You know anything about that? Ruth stepped out onto the porch, jaw set. They're not orphans, she said. They're mine. The man raised an eyebrow. That's so. Eli stepped forward, quiet but firm. They've been here since March. Sick, starved, left in a storm. No one came for them but her. She kept them alive. This is their home now. Paperwork don't say that, the younger one said. State's still got jurisdiction. Might be folks looking. They had someone looking, Ruth said. He gave up. The older man looked between them, then out at the field where Levi and Molly stood watching from behind the woodpile, hands clenched. "You got means to provide for them?" he asked Eli. "I've got land," Ellie said. "Food, shelter, love." The man sighed and took off his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. "I ain't here to ruin nothing," he said. "But if someone makes a claim, we're bound to follow it." "Then let them come here and see," Eli said. "See what's grown out of what they left behind." The men stayed only long enough to take notes, ask for names, rough dates, promise to file a report, maybe send someone else out. But they didn't come back, and Ruth didn't ask what Eli would done if they had. By late summer, the beans climbed the fence posts and the corn was shoulder high. The children built a scarecrow out of old clothes and Eli's second best hat. At night they sat in the field and watched the stars. Ruth started smiling more. One morning she stood barefoot on the porch, hands on her hips, watching the sunrise stretch across the land like something reaching home. Ellie came up behind her, slow. "I was thinking," she said. "Dangerous business," he murmured. She smiled sideways. "If we cleared out the back room, we could fit another cot, maybe two, in case someday." Ellie's heart stuttered, then steadied. "You saying you want more trouble in this house?" She turned to him, eyes soft and shining. "I'm saying this place can hold more than it used to." He didn't answer, just pulled her close, his chin resting atop her head. That fall they sealed the windows before the frost, painted the door a soft red, built a bench beneath the cottonwood where the wind always whispered. Inside, the carved fox still sat on the mantel, and beside it, a new carving, a cradle small and rough with Ruth's lace tucked inside like a promise. The land has more to say. Subscribe and listen.